Good. Okay, so Juanita, let's hear a good afternoon from you, and I make sure your connection is up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Juanita James, President and Chief Executive Officer of Fairfield County's Community Foundation. Can you hear me okay?
All right, we're hearing on the chat that you hear us. That's great. It's good to see some people using the chat already. Just a note about that. We'll be using that throughout the webinar for ways to submit questions, comments. We're going to do another poll like this first one. We see that about 12 of you have responded to the poll. Feel free to click on that. We're going to have another one a little later. You'll get yourself familiar with the technology that we're using here today. As we get going, just another bit of logistics. I feel like I'm setting up a babysitter for my daughter here with all these directions. Other notes are that as you go along, you'll see in other slides, this one here with our bios as an example. Down in the footnote, you can see a reminder about using the chat to the whole group, or us, or Juanita, or Ankita, who's monitoring the question. You can also raise your hand during the course of today if there's something that you want to bring up, and Ankita will be monitoring that and can contact you sort of on a sideline. I think that's it for our logistics. Juanita's introduced herself. Let me say that I'm Edith Buss. I'm a principal at Achieve Mission. I'm one of our founding staff members, and I've had the pleasure of working with a number of organizations on their leadership team effectiveness. And I did that with Juanita. We worked on that project along with a few others at Fairfield County's Community Foundation. And we're looking forward to sharing some of what we learned in that process and across those clients that it might be useful to all of you. The main thing that is really driving us today is trying to share an answer to the question of how I can bring the diverse skills and perspectives of my leaders to bear on our biggest goals, decisions, and opportunities. Any organization has a collection of its most senior people, but how are they really channeled either as individuals or perhaps more powerfully as a team to lead the organization as a whole? So we'll be looking at that. Let's go back to our poll here for a second. We've got a few more responses in. Anybody who wants to click in their response and hit submit, let's see how it's turning out here. All right, I think we'll pause on the number of responses we have here. Juanita, you want to take over?
Oh, absolutely. Shall we wait to get some more poll results in? Would you like me to just, I've been leading the Fairfield County's Community Foundation for 5 years, and I brought Achieve Mission in a couple of years ago as we were looking to not only focus our strategy, but really expand our leadership capability as a team to drive strategy going forward. And I realized that we had not had any of the foundational elements of really good leadership and team development. And in our case, we were really working as individual contributors, and I recognized the need to invest in some significant human capital management because we all know that an organization is really only as strong as its leadership team, and an effective team can drive growth and lead in some new directions. So my focus was to build a high-impact team and to assemble a group of very talented individuals, but making sure that we would create something where the sum was much greater than each of the individual parts.
So that last thing you said, Juanita, that the sum is greater than each of the individual parts is really, I think, the definition of a team where together you're better than you are as individuals and you have some shared goals. A working group would be more of a hub and spoke sort of setup, or where people are just there representing their own areas, but there aren't shared goals. I think we've got about a dozen responses, which is about half of the folks who are on the call. So let's go ahead and go with that. It looks like we've got a clear trend in our results here, Juanita.
So I am not seeing the results of the poll, and perhaps you can help me out there in terms of whether the balance is moving more toward a working group or a team.
Sure. Well, I'll just jump in. I think the results here are pretty clear. We've got 83% of the folks on the call who responded felt that they are thinking about a team in their case of the organization, and only 17% are have a working group in mind. And I'd say that's a good place to start right now. If you are transitioning from a working group to a team, that might be a good time to bring in a team charter. And if you already have a team and wanting to build forward a team charter, which is the main tool we're going to be sharing today, you are in the perfect position to get started with that. So that's where we're going to head for a little bit. Let me orient you. We're going to start just with a little bit of what often happens with teams here with the usual, and then provide an idea of what something better might be in terms of a path to team performance. And then we'll hear back from Juanita sharing her story and what that looked like at Fairfield County's Community Foundation. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with a period of time for comments and questions, reflections that you who are joining us on the webinar today have about this topic. And feel free to enter those under chat, and Ankito will tag them as questions, and we'll look at them along the way. All right, good. So let's take a look at this, the usual, muddling through. This sort of chart might be familiar to many of you, of forming, storming, norming, and performing. It's actually sort of an oldie but goodie. Tuckman created this model in the mid-'60s, and it was really a popular model about accepted wisdom on how teams form and move towards performance for many years. I know it was the one that we talked about early in my career when I was at City Year. I was given a team of about a dozen incredibly diverse young adults. We had some goals we needed to accomplish as an urban environmental team here in Boston. And like many of the other teams that had just formed that year at City Year, after getting to know each other briefly and trying to accomplish some things together, we quickly began storming and having some struggles. And I remember that my colleagues sort of would give me an understanding nod, a sympathetic look, and a pat on the back that, oh yes, like your team is storming, it's okay, that's normal. And when I said what to do about it, the general response was kind of like, yeah, it just takes time. It just takes time. You got to muddle through a little bit, wait for it, and it gets better. And I thought, oh, well, that's somewhat comforting, but I wish there were a better way. And I was really pleased later on to learn that as some research was really coming to bear that there was a better way. You weren't just doomed to stumble to performance, but that there are ways to fast track to performance and get out of that muck. One of the main things for that was a team charter. So before we move into that, I want to return to Juanita and have her come back to that story of what was happening at Fairfield County when she arrived in 2011 and what happened in her early years there, leading up to the time that her organization and ours, Achieve Mission, met.
Well, thank you very much, Edith. So I started at Fairfield County's Community Foundation in October of 2011. My predecessor had been the CEO for the past 18 years and chosen to retire. And at the same time, the VP of Finance also chose to retire, who had been a long-tenured employee, and we did not have any development function in place at the foundation. So one of the first things I realized was that we had a challenge because unlike private foundations, the community foundation model is such where we do actually have to raise resources in order to do the work that we do. And because we are place-based, we have to meet the needs of the community. And because we have all of Fairfield County, which comprises 23 towns and cities, we had to meet the needs of very diverse communities, from those that were extremely wealthy as well as those that have extreme poverty, and with both a mix of urban and rural and suburban areas, all as part of one county. So the first thing I realized is that I had some tremendous experts, who, particularly on the program staff, but I also had a brand new VP of Finance and as a new CEO coming out of the private sector, deciding what our priorities were going to be and putting my arms around the business model were a real challenge. So one of the things I realized was when I hired our development director, that we were each operating as real subject matter experts, but the team was not really working across the organization, not thinking strategically, and certainly everyone was so head down in their own work, they were not interacting as peers to collectively look at strategic goals and priorities. So I immediately began to expand staff and capabilities, but the other thing I did was insist on having a human capital management budget, which was the first time as an organization we looked at human capital management and staff development as a priority to invest in. I increased our staff capability as well as expanded our operations by 35% in 2 years. So fast forward. Then when we got to 2013-14, we had a new strategy to focus on community leadership work in addition to the grant making that we had been doing, a very disciplined process to examine the critical needs with a market research, evidence-based approach. And we had a goal of really achieving financial sustainability and building the internal capacity. So we found that the staff was very stressed. They didn't feel well utilized. They were overwhelmed with the amount and volume of work as we had moved into this new community impact direction. And we still had an organization structure that was anchored to our prior strategy. So in October of 2013, we launched a project with Achieve Mission. And we focused on 3 areas. How could we develop the capacity of our managers and our leadership team so that they could be more effective, both with respect to time management, meeting management, and staff development, and really understand what their role was as managers to coach and lead others. We also took a look at the organization structure and the culture that we wanted to create going forward.
All right, great. Thanks for that intro, Juanita. So that brings us to the point of the sort of a lot of things happening at Fairfield County as Juanita came in, recognizing some strengths, grappling with having a new team in place, some existing members, some new ones, and thinking, how do I get this group to really perform? And that question was really one that started to get a lot of attention in the 1990s with some research from Katzenbach and Smith, who really made a big splash with their book, The Wisdom of Teams, where they went out and studied dozens of teams from the military, nonprofits, for-profits, hospitals and universities to find high-performing teams and find out what is in common across those teams that they could learn. And they did find an answer to that question, happily for us. And these are the 5 things that really stood out in their research. The first 3 are sort of self-explanatory. I'm going to touch on them lightly and spend a little bit more time with the 4th and 5th ones, because in our next slide, it's going to be another poll, a chance for all of you to chime in with your own experience again. As you hear me describe each of these elements, think about if the team that you are holding in your mind that you used when you replied to the first poll has these elements or not. And we're going to look and see of the teams represented on today's call what are most common in place now. So the first one is a common purpose. I think that stands for itself. And rolling from that purpose, some performance goals and some specific metrics that go with that. Complementary skills across the team, whether that's technical or interpersonal problem solving, is a must for the team to be able to accomplish its work. The last 2 are, I think, a little harder to fall in place without having some real intentionality. And that's a commitment to a common approach for getting things done. I think maybe more familiar than what that looks like is what it looks like when you don't have it. And this is when you're not sure when you're meeting, who's in charge, who's doing the agenda, how are we making decisions, are we making a decision? Perhaps now that we've made a decision, what should we do? Who needs to know about this decision? If you don't have answers to those things, it's often a sign that there's not a common approach for getting things done that the team has really established. These are often the norms of a group. And then the last is mutual accountability, mostly represented by a commitment and trust in the team. That often builds up over time. And values are one way that can be expressed. I think of not having these last two as being common to almost any group assignment you've had in undergrad or grad school, where a group of students in a class have to accomplish something together. What it means to get an A or a B on that project is pretty clear, and you've got a range of skills in the team for getting it done. Often those are in place, but these last two really fall apart, and that's when you have the folks who don't show up on time, if they show up at all, or they're not clear what their role is, so they don't volunteer for things, or they volunteer and then don't do it, and there's not a way to follow up on that. And I would expect that there's also other people on those teams, maybe commonly represented by the types of folks who are on a call today, who figure out a way to get it done, are committed to the end result, and do whatever it takes to finish out the work and make sure that it's successful. But at the end, know that it feels like a little bit of a raw deal that everybody gets the same grade, and the way that the work was shared and accomplished together didn't feel good and maybe wasn't evenly balanced in the way it could have been. So with that as background, let's go to our next poll and see how many of those things are in place for the teams you all are thinking about. So go ahead and enter this. You can click as many boxes as apply to the team that you have in mind, including all of them, which would be fabulous if anybody on the call has all of them. Don't be shy or humble. Show us what you got. All right, I'm seeing our numbers come along here. Looks like there's some still adding. I'm going to hold off for a minute before we display our results. Okay, looks like it sort of tops off. Let's look at our results here. What do we have? All right, well this is, still a couple coming in. Not too late, keep going. All right, looks like we've evened out here a bit. There might be a couple stragglers coming in, which would be fine. But this is interesting. Here we see that common purpose is the thing that most of the teams have that are represented on the call today, 90% of them. It's the most popular, followed closely by a mix of complementary skills and a strong commitment to get the work done. So that's great. I'm pleased to see that strong commitment to getting the work done and shared approach showing up there. And then we're a little lower on specific performance goals and that mutual accountability. All right, let's look at, we're going to show you in a second what answering those questions looks like to a particular team. So here's the thing that comes from that research into teams is if you know that those are the key things that a high-performing team needs, they're the essential ingredients, well then you can do something to be specific about making sure that you get those put in place on purpose. And here you see that triangle of those 5 elements match each to an element of a team charter. All right, so let's take a look at what one of these looks like when it's done. This is a sample team charter from a client that I worked with just this fall. In this case, a new CEO was coming in, and she was able to pretty much reform. It was a small leadership team, and reform it with her leadership once she arrived, because there had been just a couple of members. One had left with the previous CEO. One had a retirement coming up in the very short term. And then she decided to add a team member by elevating and hiring in a new human resources and talent person. And she kept her CFO, stayed in place. And they were relaunching their team, and we did a day-long retreat and came up with this team charter. And I'll let you guys take a look at this and see what's in here. I put in some notes in green that match up with the Katzenbach and Smith 5 elements if it's not clear which the matchups are. I've got a question here asking if we're going to make the presentation available after the webinar, and we are. We're going to send this deck in PowerPoint format so that you can use it and cut and paste it and modify it yourself. We're also making a recording of this that will be posted and sent out to you, along with some tools, like a DIY kind of toolkit for leading your own team to do a team charter. All right, helpful to see that comment over there from Liana, and anyone else who wants to chime in with questions and comments like that, feel free to use that space. Awesome. All right, well, so we heard a little bit about Juanita's situation, and you know, because we sort of like already let the cat out of the bag, that her team did a leadership team charter. And this one that we are showing, you might think like, hey, these are useful for everybody. But I just do want to make a point that team charters help with a number of problems with teams, but maybe not all of them. Here on the slide you see some examples of times that team charters really are a useful tool, and it's a good time to pull one out and give it a try with your team to really pull it together and give you a better roadmap for your work together. It's not going to help you, though, decide, for example, when you should add members to your team. I spoke regarding the example in that organization, they added people to the team. Juanita is going to tell you a little bit about that. Doing or not doing the team charter doesn't help those executives answer that particular question, nor will it really give you an indication of if it's time to move to a more formalized leadership team, or perhaps what kind of, if you need more of a directional policy setting or decision-making team. It's not going to help with those things. But if you have a team that's formed, you're transitioning, you need to tune up some areas, and you feel like you're not really reaching your potential, a team charter can really help with those things. So with that, I want to turn back to Juanita and her story thus far, and let her share with you the exciting, well, it's not quite the conclusion, but the exciting next chapters of her time at Fairfield County before we get to her reflections at the end.
And I think you're right, it is a journey, but I will tell you one of the things that the team charter and the process helped us do is first we really overhauled our entire goal-setting process. And we got to the point where every individual in this organization understands how their goals and their specific objectives down to the individual supports the mission and the goals and the strategic goals of the organization. We have completely overhauled our performance management process, and we created a very disciplined approach to managing staff meetings with specific agendas that are both a combination of information sharing as well as decision making. And we have seen the results from our staff of feeling that they are both more informed, significant improvement in how they feel that their work is aligned to the goals. As Edith mentioned, I did revise my membership team. I actually promoted 2 individuals to the leadership team and completely revamped the job description of one of my leadership team members to be much more focused on strategy and forward thinking and sort of keeping her finger on the pulse of what was going on externally, and then making sure that that information gets cascaded back to the organization so that we're always in an innovation or innovative approach. In addition, we have implemented quarterly operating reviews where there's a very disciplined process of how we report progress against the goals that we set initially at the beginning of the year. And if we don't feel that those goals are realistic, we adjust them. Sometimes we end up pushing them off to the next calendar year or revising them, because as you get into all of these projects, some of them may be more difficult or complex or more dependent on other external factors than others. The other thing we do is we have a quarterly retreat with very defined agendas so that the leadership team can talk about strategic issues, personnel issues, some other challenges. But I think most importantly what that charter did was not only align us on our goals, we have very clearly articulated values and operating principles that we not only adhere to, we call each other on that behavior if we don't see the leadership team members performing or behaving in a way that we've agreed are aligned with our values and operating principles. So now, again, we've enjoyed some tremendous success. We've seen significant impact and growth in our community impact initiatives and success, where we are expanding programs to serve more individuals, but we've also expanded our external partnerships to several major community organizations, including 2 of our community colleges. We have dramatically increased our numbers of new funds and new contributions and new donors and participants in our process. And we have expanded the network of nonprofits that we serve throughout Fairfield County. So whether it's the donor side, the community impact side, or the grantee side, we've expanded and deepened those relationships. So now we are looking at where do we go in the future. This organization is about to celebrate its 25th anniversary as a community foundation in a time where the landscape is even more competitive, where the needs are greater, and where the external pressures are even more significant, both on our grantees as well as on our donors. So we are looking at what the future organization structure needs to look like. And we've begun sort of a 3-year plan. I've already begun to make some strategic moves by appointing a vice president of operations so that I can focus more on external issues and external donor cultivation and development, and have someone more focused on the internal day-to-day management of operations. I have much greater diversity in terms of my leadership team, both with respect to technical competencies, gender, age, more diversity than I had when I came in. Our meetings and goals are more structured, and we are strengthening those operating norms. And we also instituted a talent review where twice a year we really take a look at the entire staff in terms of where our who are our performers, who are our strong performers, who are our high potentials. Do we have the right staff development plans in place? Are people progressing where we need people to be in terms of that high-performance team? And now I'm about to actually institute a 360 feedback process to my leadership team members so that we can take a look at what are the competencies we need for the strategies of the future, because this process is ever ongoing and you can't really rest on past accomplishments. Growth is, and learning, continual learning is a core value that we have within the organization.
Great.
So that's where we are in 2016. Yeah.
Thanks, Juanita. I'm starting to see a couple questions come in on the side, or comments about some of the materials we've showed already, which is fantastic. I see a really good one here that we'll cover in question and answer, but now is a good time to start queuing some of those up and giving us an idea of what's on your mind. That's the story to date, and Juanita has really been at this, as you see, for a number of years, and very sort of athletically and intentionally moving both the organization and within that some real attention on her leadership team. And she's got some perspective by now that I think is pretty hard-won and wise. So we want to turn our attention now to just what are some of the key points that Juanita would share, words of wisdom based on what she's learned from her own experience so far.
Well, the first thing I would suggest is that change management is extremely difficult. We all know that. The larger the team, the more challenging some of the dynamics are, particularly if you build a diverse team, because you must bring in skill sets and perspectives that are different in order to accomplish the whole. So for my leadership team, who are very creative, action-oriented, not particularly process disciplined, they have some tendencies to become impatient with those who are more conservative, risk-averse, maybe process-oriented. But what I've learned is you need all of those skill sets, because if you don't have the process discipline, you can really make some organizational decisions that put the organization at risk, or not have the careful analysis to know that you've got the resources and the skills to accomplish what you would like in terms of accomplishing your dreams. On the other hand, if you have all who are extremely conservative, you won't take any risk. And we can't be in the business of societal change and institutional change without taking some risk. So what I have found is that having an articulated purpose and goal, and also having some real documented ways of how we want to approach the work, and whether it's specific performance goals, making sure that I have those complementary skills, and that even when we have our differences, that there is a commitment not only to the work, but a commitment to the approach of how we will problem solve, how we will brainstorm, how we will get things done as a team. The work that one can accomplish is so much more significant than each individual if they were only bringing those individual talents. I think one of the big struggles was mutual accountability, particularly when you are working in a collaborative environment where no one individual or one team can drive the progress or drive the goals and successes by themselves. We need that interplay between development and finance. We need a strong partnership between program, finance, and development. So it's when you put all of those things together, respecting the differences, but also appreciating how those different perspectives can really meld into a stronger, more aligned vision, one can really make some significant progress and feel quite appreciative of not only all of the talent that is involved, but a true sense that we are making a difference, adding value, and what I see most is a healthy respect for all members of the team and the interplay between them. So that's my thinking, is that it was an extremely important investment. We made it at the right time. We continue to invest in this work because it is a learning process, and it's been a very rewarding one for the foundation.
Great. Thank you, Juanita. I see a couple of questions coming in here. Feel free to add more. If you'd like to go back to an earlier slide, for example, I know to answer one of these questions, and I'm going to go back to that sample team charter to give you another look at that. Feel free to request to see something earlier if you want to go back to it. But we are now at the point where we can open it up to a little bit of discussion here. As noted from that earlier question, we are sending this deck out with links to other DIY materials that are going to be posted on our website and a recording from this webinar. Likewise, feel free to get in touch with Juanita or myself with any follow-up questions that you have at a later point. One of the questions that we had that I'm going to go back to here was regarding just as doing a team charter. How long does it take? Do you really do it in one day? And I will tell the story of this client and let Juanita share what it looked like at Fairfield County. They were somewhat similar. We also, with this team here that created this LEAP charter, did most of it in the first day. We had like a 5-hour retreat, and this was one of the things we did. We did some other pieces too. So it took a couple of hours. And you'll see, I think there's a place in here, under goals and metrics, that you'll see some notes that say see dashboard metrics, or they had some metrics in particular to create. They had an idea on that day of laying down how they would show that they were successful against the goals. And so all of this was generated within a couple of hours and then codified and then sort of printed out, and people had copies, and they were able to tune it up in the next week or two as they started to use it. Juanita, I know, tell about what happened at Fairfield County what it came together. And then there's a follow-up question that I think this goes right into, which is how do you make it really come alive, and what does it look like to tune it up over time and have it be more than just a piece of paper?
Yeah, so I would say that for us, it's the prep work leading to the team charter that took the time, because we did a survey of our employee population so that we could really identify where we felt the greatest needs were, where were the greatest issues, where did we have the most challenges as a leadership team. So first, the data collection, analyzing the information, understanding what the implications were, that took some time. I think it took several weeks in order to go through that process. Once we were all together, and we invested a number of hours in making sure we understood what those questions were, what that feedback was, what did it signify, then I think it took us another couple of days meeting, because we did it in an approach where we would float something and then have some time to reflect on it, digest it, and then come back together as a team to weigh in on those reflections. So I would say the charter itself took a couple of days, but leading up to the charter, the process took about 3 months.
I think you see here, too, that the operating norms is one of the biggest sections. A lot of the first elements that get laid out in an operating norm for a team that's been working together for a little bit can happen pretty quickly. Like, do we want to keep meeting on Tuesdays every other week for 2 hours? Some of those pieces are just a matter of recording it. Pieces that take longer under the operating norms to pull together, often deciding how to decide, which is a stumbling block for many teams. All right, there's another question here. Let me take a look over here. I have to make sure. Juanita, here's a question for you. Monica wants to know how your approach might have changed without the assistance from Achieve Mission.
It would have just taken longer, because one of the things that Achieve Mission table was the cumulative set of tools and methodologies to approach a situation. What I found very valuable was their ability to help us level set, facilitate the conversation so that they were structured, giving me the freedom to lead and participate. It is hard to both facilitate and lead and be a part of a team building exercise simultaneously. And I will say the leadership team found the work and the tools and methodologies that Achieve Mission brought to the table incredibly valuable, and we use those tools. We've incorporated into our management toolbox on a regular basis. And frankly, just the depth of experience and the ability, Edith, we worked very closely with Edith as well as with Partner. Their breadth of experience of working with teams, working with other organizations, and being able to bring examples, suggestions, not necessarily the solutions, but ways to think about how we wanted to operate was incredibly invaluable. I think it would have taken me another 2 years to get to the point that we got to in that period of time if I were trying to do it, without the support of Achieve Mission.
Thanks, Juanita. That was a nice plug. I'll say our intention with this webinar, though, today is to give you as much as you need to do this piece on your own and be successful. Juanita's point about how it can be hard as the leader to be a participant and a facilitator, I would recommend when you get to the DIY toolkit, if you're thinking about doing this with a team in your own organization, that if you're going to use a sort of retreat setting or a little bit of a longer meeting to establish a charter, that you do try and find someone else to come in and be the facilitator during that time, and just free up each of the actual team members to have on a full participant thinking cap and let someone else monitor the things that a facilitator would pay attention to. But our intention is that you should be able to get yourself to a pretty good team charter. I'll say also there's, to the question about sort of how do you bring it to life over time, the materials we're going to post after the webinar will include a few things about tune-ups and, like 3 or 6 months later, some questions to ask the team that bring out reflection that would allow you to tune up your charter and improve it over time, and think about especially how the accountability evolves over time. That is something that even if you lay out the guiding values on a team charter, really bringing that to life requires some intentionality and the development of that commitment and trust. And that is a piece where time just is one of the necessary ingredients. But by naming the other pieces of the charter and being clear on your values, you're setting yourself up for success and a faster track towards performance with the team.
So, Edith, can I add one more thing? One of the other real benefits of the team charter for me is the fact that when I bring in since that time we've brought on a new controller, we've brought on a new marketing director. Having that team charter actually helped me onboard and get those new leaders, and their roles into play a lot faster because it was laid out, our operating norms, how we work, what our goals. It was a much easier onboarding process for they weren't leadership team members, but for new director-level, high-level management positions within the organization.
Great. All right, there's another question here, and I think, Juanita, you're in a perfect position to answer this one. And it is about the decision you made to add members to your team. You made some quick changes to your leadership team right when our work started, and then some adjustments later on. How did you handle the politics of those changes in the organization as you were moving around some existing staff?
Well, the communications is a critical piece. I start every change with what is it that we are trying to accomplish? Where are we successful? Where are we struggling in accomplishing our goals? And why does this configuration help to support what we are trying to accomplish? And I'm very sensitive to what's the benefit for each individual by having the team competencies expanded and having more of a bench to do the work. Because as I said, we started out with everyone feeling totally stressed and overwhelmed. And part of that problem was people were juggling too many different and sometimes not necessarily complementary tasks and goals at the same time. So by freeing people up to focus on very important areas of work and bringing in some skill sets and competencies for the other work, we found that we were able to accomplish more. So that's how I approached it.
Great. Let me note, too, that while a team charter, as I said, doesn't expressly guide you on when to add members of the team, making sure once you've set your goals and metrics, if you feel you don't have the right composition on your team to meet those, that can be a time to revisit that, whether it's adding a permanent member or having someone come in as a subject matter expert periodically. I would say there has been something of a noticeable trend for executive teams to get a little larger and a little larger and a little larger than they traditionally were a number of years ago. And this was picked up on in an HBR blog post that came out this fall that we can include the link to in what we post, which is just sort of a challenge to people who are thinking of adding to their executive team to really weigh out the pros and cons. And it's something about the ever-ballooning executive team. It's a short piece, but we'll include that in what we post. So for those of you who are thinking about what the size of that team should be, it might give you some good food for thought on that. All right. Is there any other questions out there we can help with? Any comments on your own experience or reflections on what you've heard? Go ahead and post them into that chat box. Scrolling through. Well, let's see if there's any more of those to come come through in the chat. In the meantime, I'll just say that this webinar is the first one that we're doing, so thank you for joining our inaugural effort. It is the first of 3 we've planned in this pilot series. You see here our human capital management framework. We work with clients on all the topics represented in this triangle. This team effectiveness is a subset of the leadership around human capital management. Our next one will be on succession management, which I know is an enormous topic in the nonprofit field of thinking about what to do with succession. And as many nonprofits are led by baby boomers who will be aging out of the workforce and have other senior leaders on their teams often, much less if you just have normal turnover, succession management is a top priority. My colleague Mike Markovitz, who's one of our partners, is going to be leading that with a longtime client, Rich Berlin, who's the Executive Director of Harlem RBI. Mike and Rich have worked together over a number of years now around the leadership at Harlem RBI, and they'll be sharing stories much like Juanita and I did today, with a little bit of framework and materials, and then sort of stories from the trenches in real life. You know, we present these tools like they're a magical potion and then everything is great, and we know that that's not true in reality. We hope that hearing some of Juanita's story and next time Rich's story brings some of that reality to bear, that it can take a little longer or need more adjusting along the way, and reality can sometimes be a bit messier, but ultimately lead to success. So we'll hear more about that on the next one. That'll be in the new year on January 24th at 1 p.m. And our third webinar is going to be on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're still landing a date on that, so stay tuned. You will see on our Achieve Mission website, or maybe you received an email last week where there was links to register for any of these and to be up to date as they come around, and be reminded to get them on your calendar and show up. We're so pleased you were able to join us today. Let me see. I think that is the last pieces there, and I'm just going to check if there's anything. Other questions? Oh, I see one. All right. A note here that the diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're landing on sort of a focus for that. That has been such a big topic with ever-growing urgency and importance to organizations' work with their clients and stakeholders, and in the context of their mission. We see that a lot with our clients. We are working diversity and equity and inclusion into any variety of the things you see on this triangle here, which names some of the basic categories of our work around talent management with organizations. We do take a real integrated approach around that, and we're hoping to share some ideas and have some good things to help you and give you some ideas and tools and materials that will move you ahead in your own organization, like we hope the Team Charters one does from today. Oh, Ankita's just letting me know there's another question coming in. Oh, Juanita, I'll let you take a first stab at this. So the question is, how to shift the charter as you evolve, and when and how to sustain progress. So it's been almost 2 years, I think, Juanita, since we did the initial charter. What were ways that you've adjusted it since that time? And maybe I heard you talk about this in other conversations, which parts of the charter do you think fell into place the quickest as new structures and formats for the team, and which ones are still underway and deserving attention and cultivation to keep them going?
Okay, so I think one of the things, because we do have these retreats, we go back to where we are as an organization in terms of our journey with respect to human capital management and what we think needs to be adjusted. So the pieces that are in place, the guiding values have not really changed, and nor has the mission. The goals have been refined, and the metrics, most importantly, have been refined as we encounter either new challenges, new opportunities, new members, within the organization, how to align the organization talent to meet the ever-demanding and changing needs of the work that has to be done. So there's a natural process in place because of the nature of having leadership retreats, and then talking about, for example, what are the goals, and what do we need to change, and how are we operating, and are we as effective? The piece that we're looking at now, again, are our leadership competencies, and how does that fit in, because what we defined as the skills necessary, and you're going to be doing this, I think, in one of your upcoming workshops, the question of succession planning looms very large in our own organization as we change and grow, and as some of our own employees either start to approach retirement age or are thinking about a transition out. How are we doing some internal succession planning to make sure that the work doesn't skip a beat, even as we make changes with respect to staff?
Thanks, Juanita. I can add a couple of things. This is sort of foreshadowing a little bit about what's going to be in the deck that we share with you after the webinar, which will include some additional slides. One is just some tune-up questions that I think go along with revisiting it. What's working? What could be better? And then are there actual changes we want to make in that charter? And just doing that periodically. The quarterly retreats, if you're moving to that kind of a structure, is an ideal time to do that. But maybe even every quarter might be a little too much. Once a year, every 6 months or so. I think the accountability is one of the things that teams often struggle with. We say we're going to change the way we do our decision making, but our habits are that the CEO ends up, making the call, and we thought it was going to be something different. And how you reflect on that and really get underneath it requires some courageous and candid participation, I think, from everybody in the team. And being a bit proactive about it. One of the things that we often take our clients through when they do something like a team charter or something else that reflects a type of shift in the organization that requires some change management is to do what we call a pre-mortem and to look ahead, because organizations and people are often very predictable in their responses, both to the good and the bad. We know ourselves, and if we put attention on that, we can think about what might be our most likely pitfalls and step over them instead of falling into them again and again. And so we asked that question. If it were a year from now and our team charter had been just a miserable mess, we haven't lived out the values we've laid out here today, we are not meeting regularly, the decision making is disorganized as ever, whatever the things are. But if we just imagine that not much has changed, why would that have been? And get the team to reflect on what they would predict would be the sources of failure if a year from now that case were actually true. And then to step back from that and saying, if we think that's the most likely reason we would fail, what can we do now that will keep us off that path? And I think that's a really helpful question, and it sort of is also an indicator for all of the team members to be on point of watching themselves and each other and giving a helping hand and a nudge where you can, and that's the job of all of the team, not just the leader. And that's also a question that we ask is, how do we help each other uphold the new team charter and hold each other accountable? Because that can look uncomfortable, and getting people to sort of inoculate themselves against that by naming it up front, stating this would probably be uncomfortable, but I think I'd be most likely to do it this way, and then hearing encouragement or more discussion from other team members, I think opens up that conversation into one of the more difficult areas and places where this is not a magic potion and reality gets messy. And, we're just the humans that we always are sometimes in these situations. And those sorts of questions, I think, help teams quite a bit. All right. See if there's any other ones.
I would just add that we've built out a tremendous amount of mutual respect and trust as a team. And I think that the work that leads to aligning around a team charter helps to build that mutual respect and trust. So that's That's a wonderful element and both byproduct of doing this work.
I think that's a good point, Juanita. And I think if it's a shared effort and a shared work product, that really makes a big difference in that at the beginning and setting the tone. It can be tempting if you are pretty confident what you want this team to look like and what it should do as a leader, to come with a draft of the charter and then ask the team to endorse it or just modify it and update it in some way. You might end up with much of the exact same content by doing that as having the team help generate it from the ground up, but I think their experience of it and their ownership of it would be quite different. And it's a little bit of go slow to go fast, where if you spend just a couple of hours, like this is not like months of work, a couple of focused hours can get you, I think, at least 80% of what you need nailed down in a charter agreed upon by the group. And that experience of molding it together and having some discussion along the way is part of creating that buy-in. I'll say in that DIY toolkit, we have prompt questions for each one of the areas in the chart that a group can answer together to generate their responses in each one of these boxes. And that would really help you as well. All right. Great. Well, we are going to wrap up here just a little bit early. A reminder about our follow-on steps are to send out those materials and give you that link. Please feel free to share that with others and direct them to our website. We really are wanting our materials that we've developed with 80 to 90 clients at this point in time, 300 some projects, to get out to a wider audience, and this is one of our efforts for that. So I hope that you will use it and share it, and that you'll be back again on next up January 24th at 1 o'clock with Mike and Rich about succession management, and then stay tuned for other ones. In terms of other topics, one note in our follow-up email, you'll also see an invitation to go to SurveyMonkey and do a short survey about a bunch of topics that we feel like we could turn into a webinar and share with all of you. But we're not sure what you're interested in, so let us know what would be most valuable to you, and we'll queue those topics up sooner rather than later. All right, any final words from you, Juanita?
No, I think, as I said, it's a journey, and I feel that a lot of the pieces that we put in place have helped us take that journey together. And the important part of it is team, because it is much more powerful than the individual contributions. So thank you for letting me share our experiences with you, and I hope everyone has found this, some part of it, helpful.
Juanita, thank you so much for joining us today. It is a pleasure as ever to work with you and sharing your story, and some of that, what things look like in reality is an important part of blending with tools that might look a little more generic on the surface. So thank you so much, and thank you all of us for joining us in our first webinar. I hope you have a good day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.